Okay, so this is a warping mill. It's on my dining room table because that happens to work really well for how tall I am. It is a big spinning wheel. This is all made of dowels, really simple construction, that has a horizontal bar with 4 pegs on one side and 4 pegs on the opposite side. This is the pattern I linked you from Joy of Weaving. What we changed is the center dowel. We actually went and bought a longer dowel and then screwed in a toy car wheel at each side. Because it used to like to walk off the sides, the whole thing would fall apart and it would get super annoying. It would hold the cross, this would hold together the actual shape, but the legs would fall apart and it would crack to the table and be annoying. On it, I have a guide thread. So I knew for this particular warp, I wanted my warp to be 16 yards long. So I took a piece of cheap cotton, measured out 16 yards, tied it onto my very first thread, and then just ran it roughly equally spaced. They're not perfect, didn't measure, nothing quite that precise. All the way until I got to the end of the thread and tied it onto the bottom peg. Once this is on, you actually start with the material you're going to weave with. This can stay on the loom. If you do consistently 16 yards over and over, you could leave that same guide thread there. It is just there to let you measure easily your actual warping yarn. So I'm going to pause the video and start a warp thread, and then I will start again. Okay, unpaused. We are back. So my cone of yarn is on the floor, and I have found that for me it works really well to keep it roughly under the warping mill. I tied my thread on. This is where pattern starts to matter. My first thread goes over, it's tied onto this thread, goes on the outside of the second thread, on the inside of the third peg, and then out so that I get a smooth surface and down. And that just goes all the way down until we're at the opposite side. The opposite side, you always go over your outer peg. Then I chose to go over the second, in the third, around, and in. If you look at the top, the second thread at the top is opposite of the first thread. So coming up with my second thread, I came over on this side, over on that side, and over the top. And now I'm creating this X. This X is called your cross. This matters a lot. This cross is my individual cross. Every thread will alternate which side it's coming on these pegs. It's not that hard to tell you. You just slide right here and see what your last one was and go the opposite way. There are 2 crosses that matter in weaving when you are warping back to front. One is your individual cross. That's this. This keeps your entire warp in order, no matter if you're using 10 threads, 300 threads, 3,000 threads. This cross right here keeps that thread so that your leftmost thread stays on the left, your rightmost thread stays on the right, and all the way across they go. You've got to be sure to keep this. The other cross, and there are 2 ways of doing this. I do it at this end of the mill. It's called a group cross. This particular cross will stay the same for half of your set. This will be 1/2 inches worth of threads that all go in the same direction before I swap and go the other way. In this particular, this is Jaeger Spun Zephyr. I'm using a set of 24. So there will be 12 threads on this side, then there will be 12 threads that come this way. I warp back to front and I start with this group cross. The other way that you can do this is to use a crochet single chain up here and chain off every 12 threads, your group cross. I read in a book how to do it at the opposite end when I was first starting weaving. It worked really well for me and I have done it that way ever since. But I know you can also count it up here if that is easier, and a lot of people who are warping front to back will keep it up here. Either way, there are 2 crosses you keep track of, your individual cross and your group cross. Your group cross is 1/2 inch of your total set. It's the number of threads you want per inch. So I'm going to pause the video again. I'm going to get to where there's a cross at both ends, and then I will show you how that's looking. Okay, time lapse continues. We now have 24 threads on the warping mill. You can see up here, this individual cross is still individual. If you do miss a thread or two here, it is not going to be the end of the world. It's easy enough to adjust a couple, but on an overall basis, this makes a world of difference in how easy and neat your warps will be. See, going down, my threads are kind of grouped in each little chunk. You do want to be careful not to cross from one path to the next. I have done that. It sucks. Don't do that. You end up pulling the warp off and then having to try to fix those threads because you end up with a section of threads that are either too short or too long for your actual warp project. Try not to do that. So down at the bottom now, we have another cross. This cross, you can see it's much thicker. This is 12 threads and 12 threads. Each of these is 1/2 inches worth of threads. This is called a false cross. You can see how not all of the threads are crossing. This doesn't matter. You don't want to keep track of it. You don't care. It is not relevant. This guy does. So when I get ready to take this off the loom, I will have tied right here, right here, right here, right here, right here, right here. 6 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I usually use 2 colors of thread, so say red and purple, and these 3 will all be red on this side, these 3 will all be purple on this side, and it just makes sure I can keep that in a straight row because that will hold this cross. Then I will do the exact same thing. You guys excuse the mess that is my life in kitchen, by the way. Exact same thing up here at the top. So when you go to take this off, this is my working thread, there will be a knot here, 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 and then 2 at the top. One trick up here is, see this black thread that you first tied on? You have to make sure to catch that in your knot when you tie off, and you want to catch it on the side it's going on. This can especially be important if you're working with several different colors or changing your thread up here. When you do something like that, you can either tie it to the old thread, like for example you could tie right here, or you could just tie it on as a whole new thread. But if you do, and there's this little loop in here, make sure you catch that loop in your tie-off knot as well. And you keep going that all the way until you're done. I will fully admit this video will not last long enough to actually get this off the loom, so I'll start another one then, or off the mill. But what I do, I just start down here, and anyone who's crocheted, I make a single crochet loop, and I just basically single chain it off all the way around. I usually get someone to help me acting as a brake, or sometimes use my, arm, shoulder, something to keep it from spinning out of control. And that's a warping mill. This is 16 yards on here right now. I can do up to 22 yards on this warping mill without it being too crazy. And that's the plans from joyofweaving.com. So if you Google warping mill plans, it usually comes up. It's a horizontal warping mill. And there you go. I hope that's helpful.